Support for government redistribution programs in the United States.
Our research question is, which factors influence support for government spending on redistributive programs in the U.S.? Alesina and Ferreira describe redistribution as increasingly important in today's industrial countries. In the last century, the share of social spending by OECD countries doubled, while government consumption has stayed roughly constant. In order to explain the size of a government in an industrial democracy, it is necessary to look at the factors that determine demand for redistribution. We will use income, ideology, perception of waste and tax money, and religious participation as independent variables in the analysis. Our data has been drawn from the 2012 American Election Study, and our analytic approach involves multiple regression analysis and specification. Our first hypothesis is the more liberal an individual is, the more likely he or she is to support government spending on redistributive policies. Jacobi 2010 found that ideology had a role in shaping citizens' views during the 2008 elections. Our second hypothesis is as income increases, support for government spending on redistributive programs is likely to decrease. Our results are derived from Gillard 2013, who found that family income as well as individual position in the labor market are main factors influencing preferences for redistribution. Our third hypothesis is as the perception that the government is wasting tax money increases, support for public spending on redistributive programs is likely to decrease. Political trust has important consequences for policy attitudes, as described by Rudolph and Evans 2005. As a measure of political trust, we will look at opinion on how much tax money is being wasted, since waste in tax money is generally associated with inefficiency and corruption.
The indicator for the dependent variable, support for government spending, is an index which was constructed to include 4 variables, respectively measuring support for federal spending on welfare, on childcare, on aid to the poor, and on public schools. For each indicator, the exact question wording is, should federal spending be increased, decreased, or kept about the same? The standardized alpha is 0.76, which indicates that the indicators are sufficiently related to be combined into an index, and the alpha score could not be increased by deleting. The frequency distribution of the index shows that the 9 categories range from least support to most support for government spending. The mean is 8.665, indicating that this is the average value and that most cases fall near the center. Thus, we have a normal distribution. The median is 9, indicating that 50% of values fall below this category and 50% fall up. Finally, the mode is 10, indicating that this is the category with the highest number of values. The correlation matrix shows the strength of the correlation between support for government spending and the 3 independent variables. Ideology by support for government spending has a correlation coefficient of 0.448, which could indicate either a very strong relationship or that the 2 variables are measuring the same concept. Since we assume that support for government spending is influenced by a number of factors, we can rule out the second possibility and conclude that the relationship is very strong. A positive sign indicates that as ideology shifts from extremely conservative to extremely liberal, support for government spending increases. The R-square value is 0.201, which signifies that ideology explains 20% of the variation in support for government spending. In the case of income by support for government spending, and in the case of perceived waste in tax money by support for government spending, the correlation coefficient is minus 0.242, which indicates a moderately strong relationship and a negative relationship. The R-square value in both cases is 0.059, which signifies that these independent variables explain 6% of the variation in the dependent variable. And finally, the p-value in all 3 cases is 0.000, indicating a statistically significant relationship. So we can conclude that ideology is the strongest predictor of respondents' view on public spending. In order to assess the effect of each independent variable on support for government spending, controlling for the other independent variables, a regression analysis is performed. The value of the adjusted R-square is 0.268. Thus, we conclude that the explained variance is 27%. This indicates that the regression has a fairly good explanatory power. The significance of the overall equation is below 0.05, therefore results are unlikely to be due to sampling error. The significance of the individual independent variables is also below 0.05, thus we can be confident that the observed relationship with support for government spending is not due to chance. The beta values indicate that a one standard deviation increase in ideology increases support for government spending by 0.41 standard deviation from the mean. In comparison, a one standard deviation increase in family income decreases support for government spending by 0.20 standard deviations from the mean, and a one standard deviation increase in perceived waste of tax money decreases support for government spending by 0.15 standard deviations from the mean. As a general rule, the higher the beta value, the stronger the relationship the respective independent variable has with the dependent variable. Hence, we can infer that ideology has the strongest relation with support for government spending, as previously observed within the correlation analysis. Based on the finding that ideology has the strongest relationship with support for government spending, we decided to further investigate this relationship. We introduced a fourth independent variable, religious participation, which we recoded in order to isolate those who exhibit the highest degree of religious participation from all other respondents. This will allow us to compute an interaction term. We hypothesized that being conservative and participating frequently in religious ceremonies is negatively correlated with support for government spending. Thus, we expect to find a case of partial specification. Our hypothesis is based on the work by Grisman-Labous, who states that religion functions as a powerful ideology, a set of normative claims about how the world ought to function, and as a consequence, those who are religiously committed tend to take a more conservative stance in public policy. The first block of the regression analysis shows the additive effects of ideology and religious participation on support for public spending. The adjusted R-square indicates that the independent variables explain 50% total variation in support for government spending. Ideology is statistically significant, but religious participation is not. The tolerance level for both IVs is above 0.9, so there's no problem of collinearity. The beta value for ideology indicates that a one standard deviation increase in ideology decreases support for government spending by 0.383 standard deviations from the mean, while a standard deviation increase in religious participation decreases support by 0.023 standard deviations from the mean. The second block of the regression analysis shows the additive and interactive effects of ideology and religious participation on support spending. The ideology variable and interaction term are significant, while the religious participation variable is not. The interaction term can be interpreted as showing that the interaction of being conservative and participating frequently in religious ceremonies is a significant negative predictor of support for public spending. Thus, we found a case of specification. The adjusted R-square is again 0.15, and the tolerance scores tell us that multicollinearity is not a source of concern in our regression model. A path analysis summarizes the directionality and strength of the observed relationships. Ideology is positively correlated with support for government spending and has the strongest relationship, with a beta value of 0.41. Income is negatively correlated, and so is perceived waste in tax money. Altogether, the set of three independent variables explain 27% of the variation in support for government spending on redistributive programs. The relationship between ideology and support for government spending was further investigated by introducing a new independent variable, religious participation. Per se, it does not have a significant influence on support for public spending. However, ideology and religious participation combined do have a significant negative impact on support for government spending, although not a strong one. In conclusion, our results align with Jacoby's view that ideology still plays an important role in shaping Americans' view on political orientations. Ideological stances on the provision of redistributive programs seem to be influenced by religiosity, measured by religious participation, but only among conservatives. Future research could expand the analysis by including other factors that determine demand for redistributive programs, and could further investigate the relationship between ideology and political trust, as well as the impact of religious participation among moderates and liberals.